Hey everyone, it's iWuShock with another video on my information series. Today is Tier 4 familiars. Again, I'm not going to go over every single familiar, but more so just the ones you might want to keep an eye on when you're in that tier, and I will only mention ones that can be fully obtained from within that tier. So for example, Pinguida does use familiars that are found in Tier 1, but you can't actually get that familiar until much later, so they won't be mentioned until then. If you missed my other videos, check them out, as those familiars will help carry you through this tier as well. Another thing worth mentioning now is that the raids being introduced, the tier numbers get a little bit wonky. Until here, Zone 1 is Tier 1, Zone 2 is Tier 2, etc. Now though, the raids come after we beat the previous zone. This video is going to stay working with Zone 4 and Tier 4 raid, but next video will only be over the Tier 5 raid, so that subsequent videos will be Zone 5 and Tier 6 raid, Zone 6 to Tier 7, etc. Seems really weird and counterintuitive, but as we get towards the end game, it makes much more sense. In a nutshell, you beat Zone 3 to get into Zone 4, which is Tier 4, unlocking the raid. You're going to spend a lot of time in that raid, so we lump them both in the same tier. Again, this video is just going to stick with Zone 4 and Tier 4, so don't worry about it for this one, but next video will be just the Tier 5 raid, then Zone 5 and Tier 6 and so on. In the end game, it's a little bit easier to see because Zone 19 is the most recently released zone, and when you beat it, you get to the Tier 20 raid, so those are all lumped in within Tier 20 release. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in with familiars found in Zone 4, aka the Ashvale Zone, Raid 1, and some World Boss familiars. First up, I want to mention Squibbo. He's an improved Borland, just straight up better. They take one Squib from Raid 1, Astaroth's Awakening, and Tubbo from Dungeons to make a pretty good healer with low health and high power. They are very squishy though, so don't rely on them to take really any hits. But with a base increased 22.5% damage, their heals will always be stronger than usual. They're also used in a legendary familiar next tier, so you might want to go ahead and farm on them today because next video will go over that familiar. Up next is Siri Wade. They're worth mentioning because of a built-in bonus of 45% critical chance. Augments can't increase this at all, which you might think, hey, that's bad, but it's good. For DPS, you want to spread out your stats. I talked about this in another video. You can critical hit, empower, and dual strike on the same hit, so you want them spread out. They can definitely provide a nuke for you when you most need it, but I wouldn't necessarily focus on this familiar unless you are a tank, as space in your party in dungeons is definitely limited, and tank is hard to play in the beginning of the game anyways. Speaking of tanks, we have Bobo Dom. He gets a lot of hate because his stats aren't perfect and he gets outclassed later on, but personally, I love him. He's one of my favorite familiars. He has a built-in 30% evade, which can stack much higher with augments. He's fairly meaty as far as health goes. It makes him a great tank. He does have a bit too much speed, and his only heal skill is for your team at 2 SP, but otherwise he's awesome. If you have a good brain on him, he's going to be doing a lot of healing anyways. He's going to take you into late game, and he really isn't that bad of a farm to make him. He takes 4 epic familiars, but only one of them's from the raid, so you won't be in for too bad of that farm. I like to look at him as a legendary version of Thetheus, which we'll get into in a much later video, considered one of the best tanks in the game. I think Oxroth is worth mentioning, but they are very expensive. I tend to ignore any of the raid goblin fusions because of how rare they are, but Oxroth does deserve a mention. It takes both the raid boss of Astaroth and Ulxa, the raid specific goblin. This is another tank you can grab, which will actually cap out block with augments. Their skills aren't great, but if you're looking to farm for Rombolio later, which I wouldn't recommend anyways, you'll need an Oxroth to make them. So let's go ahead and move into World Boss, the Orlag clan. This is the first World Boss familiars we actually get to make. A quick reminder on World Boss is that the fusion materials are not affected by item find. So if you can't find a group to run your current tier in your preferred World Boss, solo lower tiers on normal to get the materials, you'll still get them at the same rate, so might as well use your regen. From this tier, we actually want to start with Velk. He's a really good healer that isn't super expensive. Being an epic means they're stronger than Borland with both stats and augments, and they do have more health than Squibbo. They've got a great spread heal that comes in handy, and they're used in multiple fusions later on. I do 100% recommend using them as a healer if you've been running Orlag World Clan Boss. There's no reason to not make them. But speaking of fusions that they go into, let's talk about Meaty. This tank is, well, They're meaty. This familiar has the highest health in the game. There is nobody with more health. It makes an amazing meat shield. The big downside of that is they have very little power, meaning that any attacks, heals, or brain procs are basically just like pinches. They don't really do anything. There's no oomph to them. You can stack some absorb onto meaty though to help them heal that way, but they'll only heal themselves, and it's not going to be super reliable. Meaty essentially lives on the concept of like, I'm going to live long enough for the DPS to kill the enemy, which, I mean, that's the purpose of tanks anyways, I guess. They don't scale very well later in the endgame. If we jump into World Boss Netherworld, there's only one that we can get in this tier that's worth talking about, Rarzak. And that's really because of their future use. They're a good tank with some evade and deflect built in, but they've got too much speed to really be effective, and split stats, the evade and the deflect, make it really hard to stack into one. They do work well enough if you want to go into this route. You'll be fairly unique, not a lot of people farm them. If you do want to farm them though, they're useful later on since they're part of making Drenath, which is like Rombolio's familiar for a later video. It's one of the easier mythic fusions to make. But that's all we have for tier 4. This is where we start finding familiars that can be used all the way to the end game, so if you're wanting to grind for fams, start getting ready. I know Bobo Dom gets talked a lot about in not so great terms by the community, but in my opinion, he is one of the best tanks until you get a mythic, and you can get him as early as tier 4. That's really amazing. But what are your favorite familiars? Let me know in the comments below, and good luck on your grind to get the best familiars. If you want to support me in getting better equipment or making more videos, check out the link on my channel, and don't forget to like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, and subscribe if you want more, and I will see you in the next video.